Right. Welcome, everybody, to the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni and Higher Education webinar series. I'm happy to have with us today Dr. Sylvia Sensiper. She has been writing and advocating for students with lived experience in foster care for the last 17 years and holds a doctorate in public policy and social research. Keep in mind this will be recorded and will be posted on the website. I'll list the website page in the chat in just a second, in case you're not familiar with the website. But you can find this webinar, you will be able to find, and any other previously recorded webinars will be on that web page. Feel free to type any questions that you might have into the chat or the Q&A, and there will be time at the end of the presentation for some Q&A opportunities. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it off to you, Dr. Sensiper.
Great. Thank you all for coming today. The title of our talk is, my talk is Graduate School Application Support Programs, Promoting Educational Equity and Career Advancement for Students with Lived Experience in Foster Care. And I'm going to introduce you to work I've been doing for a little over 10 years, helping students with lived experience apply for advanced and professional degrees and pursue the careers they desire. So I'll present a little background information, some data, and along the way, some of the best practices that I came upon and that I employ, as long as some of the mentors that have worked with me. And because I also have a background in research, I also have what I call generalizable ideas about how to work with students in this demographic. And it's the reason that I've kept track of the data and have some specifics about who we helped and what they ended up doing. And my forward arrow isn't working. Okay, so a little bit of history and background. In 2013, I developed a pilot program called the Guardian Professions Program, which we call usually the GPP at UC Davis. And UC Davis hosted that project until 2017. So the mission was to increase the number of California former foster youth earning advanced degrees. The program had a statewide reach, which meant that California, anybody who had been in foster care in California could participate, as well as students that were in California campus support, undergraduate support programs. So what that meant was, that was our criteria. What that meant was that if a student was actually in an undergraduate program in Iowa or even New Jersey, but had been in foster care in California during their K through 12 years, they were eligible for our help. And we did have a few that fit that criteria. It also meant that students who were from out of state but were in a California support program, all our campuses have support programs now, could get our help. And also some of those support programs, some of them worked with emancipated students or students who had no parental support, students who were akin to foster care, and those students were all eligible for our support. So after 2017, there was a gap in services, and then we started MAPS, Mentoring for Advanced and Professional Degrees, in 2020 with the same mission. And I started it with students who are young professionals who had been my students, who had helped to get to graduate school, and now were out in the professional world, and they worked as mentors. I did all the mentoring during the GPP, and we retained that same criteria of students who had experience in California foster care or students who were associated with the campus support program. And during the time of the GPP, those 4 years, over 80 students received assistance, and they became teachers, MSWs, lawyers, dentists, counselors, and other careers, which you'll see when I show you some of our data. And MAPS added an additional 57 students between the years of our operation, 2020 to 2024. And there we now have a total of 137 alumni that we've helped. And because we help students write competitive applications, generally they get some kind of funding from the institutions that they attend. And the entire cohort has received over $4 million in funding. And that includes research assistantships, teaching assistantships, as well as outright funds. So how many students potentially are we talking about? This is an estimate from the number of students who are in our university systems. But since our criteria allowed us to help students who were already out of school and wanted to go back to school, as well as I said, students who were an undergraduate at other states, it may be a wider population, but this is how we made our approximation. So we know that from data collected by the CSUs and the UCs, that there's about 5,380 students, and those are in our four-year university systems. And then there's another 15,000 at the community colleges. So for many students, a BA or a BS is just the first step on a path to their chosen career. So to approximate the number of possible students in order to talk to funders or other people who are interested in what we were doing, we used Dr. Mark Courtney's study that assessed AB 12. AB 12 is California's legislation that allows students to stay in foster care till 21. And his assessment was basically to see how successful that was, but it also gave us some understanding of how many students are interested in advanced degree. And he said 23% what he found, and his N was about 600 to 700, with more students thinking they wanted it, but 23 expecting to get an advanced degree. So I divided that 5,380 to get just the senior class, took 23% of that, and came up with an approximation of about 300 students statewide who are interested in going on to graduate degrees and need help with their applications, because it is a very complex and intense process. So how did students learn about our resources and our assistance? So during 2013 to 2017, I established relationships with all the undergraduate support programs at all the universities throughout California that have these support programs. And these relationships then continued after we started MAPS. So they're either directors or coordinators of programs. And we also, in addition to working with students who were ready to apply, we also had a lot of programming for students who wanted to know about graduate school in general. And so we considered the community colleges and their students as part of the students we needed to reach out to. And we did have participation from all three different segments. In California, we have 116 community colleges. We have 23 state universities, and there are 10 University of California campuses. And then there are a couple private school, Loyola Marymount, USC, a couple of others. We would send information about the classes and webinars to the administrators of the support programs, and they would distribute that to all their students that were in their support programs. And the support programs have various names. They're called Guardian Scholars, Renaissance Scholars. Berkeley's is called Hope Scholars. So there's no uniformity in the name across California, although many are called Guardian Scholars programs, but we know all the programs, and we know we can send out to their administrators. And as well, some program administrators also invited us, both GPP and MAPS, to provide presentations directly to generally their junior or senior cohorts, people who were getting ready to apply to graduate school or were very interested. So we had a couple of key ideas, mainly one key idea, and then a couple of kind of subsidiary ideas. The graduate school application requires preparation and includes a prospective student's academics and work, both volunteer and paid to date. The application for an advanced degree represents a portfolio of work. Most students were very, and they should be, concerned with their GPA and any tests they might have to take. For law school, you need the LSAT. For medical school, you need the MCAT. For graduate school, you need the GRE. But there are other things that we found that were just as important to the faculty admissions committees, and we helped students understand how they needed to present themselves. So they needed to present themselves so that graduate school appears to be their logical next step. They've either done work in the field they're going into, or they're well prepared for it. They've done the requisite tests and have maybe perhaps worked in a legal office. And they need to demonstrate that they're ready to be a potential colleague. What we found is that students, many students, when they said, well, I'll just use my essays that I've written before. And we always help them develop new essays because at this point in time, as you may know, admissions committees are faculty members, and they are both screening for what we would call red flags, and they want to see that students are ready to do the heavy lifting and the rigor of academic advanced degrees. They aren't that interested in hand-holding because they have a lot of research and other duties as faculty members. They often have committee work and that. So they want to make sure that students can work on their own. And so these are the things we needed to help students both understand and then ensure that their applications demonstrated that. So how did we develop the program classes? At the start, when I started in 2013, I was on a bit of a learning curve on how best to help the students. I have an advanced degree myself, but I didn't come out of foster care, so I wasn't sure. And a lot of people were giving me a lot of advice that turned out not to be particularly helpful because many people, including some of the advocates, didn't actually feel that graduate degrees were something that students who had a background in foster care could easily do. And they were uncertain how many students we would have in our cohorts. As you can see, 300 across the state. It's not huge, but it's a substantial number. What it became clear to me is that students just weren't aware of the lot of aspects of career development. And here I've itemized some of those, and then you'll see some of the classes and webinars we developed, which were based on some of these things that I noticed among students. My academic background is actually in anthropology, ethnography, so I tend to listen very carefully to the way people talk about themselves and what they're doing. So students were often unsure of themselves, even though they wanted to go to graduate school, and even though they were often highly qualified. As many of you know, one of the big obstacles, or maybe you haven't thought of it in this way, but one of the big obstacles that students who have foster care experience often face is simply low expectations. People don't expect that much of them, and it's often internalized. So they often had trouble presenting to me when I would be the first interviewer what they wanted to do. They have sometimes an ingrained sense of inadequacy because, in some sense, and I understand this, too many people have said no to them or haven't expected much from them. Students were generally confused about graduate schools and career options. That goes across the board with many undergraduates, but it was higher percentage among this demographic. Many students wanted a career in counseling, and you'll see how many students went into counseling, and when I showed the data, but didn't know enough about the various options. And many students had this idea of, oh, let me just try and put an application in and see what happens. And we know what works. Having done this, even the first year, I was aware of some things that weren't going to work, but over time, I became very aware of what worked. And students, I didn't like students just trying. I'm like, I know what to do to help you. I know how you need to prepare. Let's do that. And I'm sure you'll get in. And one of those criteria is actually applying to enough schools. Many students, well, I'm just going to apply to one because it's a lot of work. And I'm like, no, it's kind of a numbers game. You need to apply to at least 3 to 5, depending on the degree. Law school and medical school, you apply to many more. And many students just didn't understand the work needed for the application, and they didn't allocate enough time. Many of our students who were applying in their senior year also worked, sometimes full-time, and they were still finishing their degrees. So putting aside that time for working on an application that they weren't sure they were going to have a result with could be a little abstract. So what were our specific services? So I always did an intake interview, and then often there were a number of conversations after that, depending on the student. Again, was one-to-one mentoring. Sometimes I set up, I think I have another slide, I would set up, every 2 months, I want to meet with you and see how serious they were, and if they had changed their mind, decided on something else. And as we went along and we saw these common themes among students, I developed classes and webinars so that I didn't have to do so much one-on-one work that basically covered the same material. So I developed a class called Getting Prepared for Graduate School, which was an 8-week class that covered all aspects of the application process and helped people understand what they needed to do to create a competitive application. And some of that was getting what I called pre-professional experience in the workplace, or it didn't need to be paid work, it could be volunteer. We developed a class called The Path to a Counseling Career, which was a 2-hour seminar which went over the various degrees, including MSWs, PsyDs, PhD in psychology, and other kinds of MS or an MA in counseling. And then in the fall, I always ran a Putting Together Your Advanced Degree Application, which was a 2-hour workshop that kind of condensed the 8-week, really much more on the nuts and bolts of the application, where the 8-week class gave them a little bit fuller understanding of things they could do to build their resume and to build their experience, so they really looked ready for advanced degree. And then, as I said, in the fall, many of our students, and many of them do go on to an MSW, were in class, had a job, and putting together their application was difficult. The MSW application is not difficult, but it's labor intensive. All of our CSUs, our California State Universities, have MSW programs, as well as both UC Berkeley and UCLA. And there's a lot of writing involved in these. And so because they needed to apply to 3 to 5 programs, I started a workshop in June so that they could start working on it over the summer. So you could see that our program was very responsive to student needs. And as we saw a need, we tried to meet it with some kind of workshop, or talking to the undergraduate support programs, or some kind of development of some kind of programmatic aspect that would help more students. So here's an example of a student who's now actually completed her MSW at UCLA. She started with a BA in Human Services at Cal State University, Fullerton. So she came to us after she hadn't been admitted to the MSW program, and she had finished her BA in Human Services at Cal State Fullerton and had applied in her senior year. And when we looked over her application materials, we really understood why they hadn't admitted her. She actually had a good GPA, but she didn't understand the kind of writing and documentation she needed to make about her experience. She did not understand what a personal statement was or is, and that is the case with many students. Sometimes they're too personal, and they talk way too much about their foster care experience, and they don't talk about their work experience, or they just don't understand that it's not really personal. It's just the name of a kind of essay, a genre that they need to write. So after she got some more work experience, she applied to 5 schools in that gap year after she wasn't admitted. She came to us, and we recommended her getting some more work experience. She did some more peer mentoring in one of the community colleges. She applied to 5 schools, UCLA, and then 4 of the CSUs, back to Fullerton, Long Beach, Santa Barbara. No, that's San Bernardino, not Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara doesn't have a CSU. And then CSU, Los Angeles. She was actually accepted to 4, and so she needed to consider her options. Now, the tuition is different at UCLA. The CSUs are much more affordable. But she got really good funding at UCLA, which kind of balanced it out. She got what's called a Graduate Opportunities Fellowship, which was first year of tuition, and then a $20,000 flat out cash scholarship. And then she got a CalSWEC stipend, which is a stipend program where students get funding for their graduate degree if they commit to working for 2 years in a county agency. And so she ended up going to UCLA because she wanted a different kind of experience rather than going back to Fullerton or one of the other CSUs. And the funding made it affordable for her. So our mentoring, as I said, I mentored all during the year for students who came to me. I would talk to all students, regardless of what year they were in school. And if they benefited from a regular check-in, I would set an appointment depending on what they wanted to talk about. I had students that had wanted to apply to medical school, but hadn't done a biology degree, and they wanted to do a post-bac. And so just helping them strategize about what they needed to do, or students that wanted to go into an MSW, but wanted to do administrative work. So they were going to kind of take a detour and do an MBA too. And just helping students think through into a region or a domain that they didn't have much experience with, because of course, coming from background in foster care, not many of them were in households where there were people pursuing professions. And their parents themselves didn't pursue professions. So they didn't really know some of the kind of tacit knowledge that they needed to have. And then during the fall application cycle, which in California is pretty much September to March, our applications generally open in the fall. The UC's privates, usually your application is due in December. In CSU, they're often due in early January or into March. And so that was kind of the really extensive, intensive time for us. We would have students create charts with dates and what materials were due. I would assign mentors at the end of September. And so students would always have a one-to-one relationship with someone who is helping them. Sometimes it was me, sometimes you'll see with some of the young professionals who have worked with me. And students, some students already had their resumes and started essays due to summer work. And on Thursday nights, I don't know why I picked Thursday, but it seemed to be a good night. I would hold what I called office hours. I would simply be on Zoom to answer any questions that students had, so that they didn't have to wait and make a Zoom appointment to talk to me. That simple questions: how do I find this for the application? Or how do I do this? Or is this a good, who do I ask for recommendations? Basic stuff, just so they knew someone was always going to be there on an evening that they could log on and find. So who are the MAPS mentors? As I said, they're young professionals with lived experience in foster care themselves. I actually developed MAPS with the help of, they were my former students who I helped get into graduate school, who are now working in their given professions. Most of them were MSWs, one counselor and one public policy / business person. Then I had a co-coordinator who also conducted in the first year some of the initial interviews with me and did some of the long-term mentoring. And at the beginning of the fall application cycles, then, as I said, these mentors were assigned to applicants. Every prospective student had a one-to-one assistance. And I think that really helped. There was always someone they could ask questions to, as well as I was always available Thursday nights and then with appointments over Zoom. All right, so we're going to look at a little of the data, see some of the success we've had and what this population looks like. So our students by ethnicity, you can see, what is that? Over 60% are students of color. When I talk to funders or even university administrators, I would tell them not only are students with a background in foster care and underrepresented in university graduate school cohorts, but if you accept our students, you will also probably be increasing your ethnicity, your percentage of ethnicity of your cohort. And especially in California, we are really interested in increasing the ethnicity of underrepresented students in our graduate school cohorts. We had mostly females, 74% to 26% males. And then here is, and then I'm going to drill deeper into some of these professions. But as you can see, over 30% of our students elected to apply for an MSW, 36%, 49 of all our 137 students went into MSW, with another 11 going into other counseling. Now, you may not know what these initials stand for. So we had 4 masters in public policy. I'm just reading from the top of the list. The bar graph, the more specific statistics are in the white chart. Masters in business administration, Masters in Public Health. Then there were Masters of Science of various. I'll show you that on another slide. 8 of our students went for JDs, went into the law profession. We had 9 PhDs in different fields, 9 medical careers, which is a variety of dentists, doctors, and others. Masters of Arts, 13. Teacher credentials also usually earned MAs, but I separated them from the general masters because they generally are teaching in the K through 12 education schools. And then other education, those people who got masters in higher ed often wanted to do counseling in colleges and universities, or sometimes at the K through 12 level. So of the medical careers, we had 3 doctors, 2 dentists, 1 doctor of physical therapy, 1 doctor of osteopathy, 1 physician assistant. Those programs are often called various different things. This was a physician assistant studies program. And then an MA in nutrition. I placed her here because that program was generally a post-bac to go to medical school. Other counseling that were non-MSW, 6 were at MS in straight counseling, 3 PsyDs, and then 2 marriage family therapists. And then other education who were not going into public school teaching, masters in education. Again, these degrees are very similar. They're just called different things at different universities. A master's in education, 3 MA in higher education, 3, and a master's of science in higher ed. Now, among the Masters of Science, the MS, we had an engineer, an accountant, and I think there were a couple of biotechnology people. Our PhDs, there are 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, must have been 2 in, I think there were 2 in biology. So these are, or it might have been psychology. I can't remember which one. There's 2 multiples of these, but this was the range of fields that our different PhDs went into. And then the Master of Arts, again, a very wide range of disciplines that students are approaching, from community development, divinity, literature, sports management, urban planning, broadcast and communication arts. So we were able to help all our students. We didn't necessarily set them up with a mentor that was in their same field. I didn't feel that was necessary. What you really need to understand is the kind of essays you need to write, and again, how to talk about your foster care experience. So geographic and campus choices, 77% of our students stay in California. Of the students we assisted, 69 students were from California State Universities, 55 students were from University of California campuses, 8 students were from private schools, and 5 students were from out of state. And those out-of-state students were students who were either in a program, an undergraduate program, as I said, in California, a support program, or they were in undergraduate at a university outside of California, but had been in California foster care. And students attended these schools. 35 students went to California State Universities, 51 students to University of California campuses, 28 students to private universities, and 23 students to out-of-state schools. So here are the specifics of the assistance, what we actually offered. I've talked a little bit about this, but maybe not as specifically to give you a sense of what we actually did. So students often didn't know how to search for appropriate programs. They might say, oh, I want to go to law school, but how do I look? Or I want to do a PhD in data science. How do I find what program is good for me? So we help them do that. I help them make contact. I sometimes introduce them if I knew faculty members at places or administrators or deans. And sometimes they needed help deciphering websites, looking for advanced degree programs. It's not always explicit or clear what the program is going to give you. So helping them figure out what they were actually going to get if they did an advanced degree. I also always encouraged outreach and networking. Some programs do have what they call information sessions, and it's always good to do that, but also simply to go and talk to program coordinators, graduate students in those program faculties, really get a sense. Students are like, oh, they really want to get in, but you are picking them too. So you want to know what you're getting into. And then timeline management. How do they manage their time so they can get these very intensive applications done? Just trying to keep them on schedule, making sure they made appointments with us and delivered their rough drafts of their statements to us in time for us to edit and help them improve them. So there are a number of things that you have to submit for a graduate school application. Some of you may know this. You have to, statement of purpose is generally a career statement. A personal statement is more about you. It's often used for scholarship. It often talks about the obstacles or adversity you faced. There are sometimes diversity statements that talk about you as a candidate or if you've worked in diverse situations. And then some schools require also scholarship statements. So there's generally at least one long, complicated, not complicated, but needs to be well-written essay that describes who you are so someone can get an idea, or the admissions committee can get an idea of who you are outside of your grades and test scores. And so those need to be carefully constructed. And as I said, they need to also talk about your foster care experience and show your resilience and ability to persevere in the face of obstacles. We needed to ensure that students put their resumes in an academic format so that they were readable, graphically interesting, but not the way you might format it for a job, because those are very different. I think the resumes I've seen for jobs that students would send me are usually very, sometimes colorful, sometimes graphic. Academic resumes, just straightforward, but very clear, stating who you are and make it clear so that faculty members are reading many applications. How can you get it across so that it's really clear and easy to read? We also talked to them a lot about who would be the best people to write them recommendations. Sometimes students wanted to have their support program directors or advisors write those, but faculty or actually sometimes supervisors on work are much better as recommenders. They don't, faculty aren't interested in the necessarily in some of the things that support directors may know about you, but they are interested as, are you going to be a good student? How are you responsible and good on the job? And then any other documentation that students had to send in. We looked at everything. An addendum is sometimes they had trouble accessing online applications. An addendum is something you write to point out any inconsistencies in your application. I've come across something called a quantitative resume, and then there's often optional essays, and just strategizing and brainstorming with students, and then of course reading their drafts and their final copies so that everything they submitted was as top-notch as it could be. So in terms of best practices, these are some of the more general ideas I thought about as I worked with students. Most students who are going on, not all, but many students, regardless of whether they've been in foster care or not, have nonlinear paths. But among former foster youth, it's often very, it's generally the case more than not. And so encouragement and more encouragement, again, help with self-presentation. Many students, because they've been said no to too many times or not heard or not pushed, the expectations about what they can do are often lower than what they are capable of. We often needed to help them, especially when they were doing interviews, talk about themselves. I always allowed the student to lead what they wanted to do, but always offered and discussed strategies for getting the work done and helping them find vital information. We were working across many disciplines. So I don't know everything, but I could find them someone to talk to who would know that field better or recommend someone to talk to. Trying to keep students out of dead ends and also not, especially when it came to getting them into programs where they wouldn't get into too much debt. We tried to steer students in good directions so that they actually came out of graduate school into a profitable and sustainable career that they liked. Patience, it's always valuable when you're talking to any student, but often our students had to postpone plans or regroup. A number of our students had come to us and hadn't gotten in, and they were kind of anxious, but we were pretty sure, having seen so many applications be accepted, what worked and what didn't. So we did have a couple students have to reapply. Again, worked on their essays, helped them develop more academic language and also good interview skills. And then I also did some advocacy and intervention. I wrote letters to diversity officers or contacted faculty, help students meet deans that might have a say in if their application was accepted. Just making sure that students had the best chance. All our students were qualified. I would never help a student I didn't think couldn't do it, but sometimes faculty admissions committees are very set in who they think are good students for their programs, and they don't understand the nuances or some of the adversity that some of our students faced. And so just helping them to see that how you need to look at this student, because they might be a little different than the traditional student that you would accept. And I think my next slide is an example of this. This is Ramiro. He did a BS in marketing management at Cal Poly Pomona and then worked 6 years in the entertainment industry. And while he was a student in Cal Poly, he got average grades, maybe just a little over a 3.0, because he was on his own. He had an older brother who had taken him out of foster care and got guardianship of him, but late in his teens. So he knew he needed to have a job when he got out of undergraduate. So what he did as an undergrad was he probably worked in every major studio in Southern California as an intern. I think he had like 6 different internships. And then when he graduated, he got a job with HBO in New York. And from that position as an executive assistant, he worked his way up to a managerial position in HBO and then also transferred, I can't remember, another studio. So he clearly had skills in business that weren't necessarily reflected in his grades. And the GMAT, which is the test you take for an MBA, was difficult for him. But on his own, he found 2 pipeline programs for underrepresented students that gave him some more access to administrators, recruiters, and a cohort. And he did all the legwork for that. What I did for him, again, we are flexible in our mentoring, was worked with him on all his essays and helped him learn how to frame what he did so that faculty would understand him. For instance, explaining that he desperately, or not desperately, but definitely needed a job when he got out because there was no going home to live. And that's why he focused on internships. So suggested ways of framing his experience that a faculty member might understand. When I first started out, I took a lot of the applications and the essays that students had written and showed them to faculty members and asked them what their opinions were and what they would recommend students say or not say. A number of my friends are faculty members, and I hear them talk about student applications all the time. And then for Ramiro, I actually wrote a letter to the UC Berkeley, actually not the UC Berkeley, it was the UC Berkeley Haas School of Business Diversity officer, a particular diversity officer for the business school, telling him that he needed to look at Ramiro's application very carefully because it wasn't going to look like the traditional student that he admitted. What was traditional is that Ramiro had worked for 6 years in industry. Those are the kind of students they want for an MBA, students that have work experience. Yet his GPA and his test scores did not reflect his business acumen. And so this is because of his background as someone who had experience in foster care and those kind of obstacles that he had to overcome. So what student costs were we able to cover? During the GPP, we covered all costs of applying. test prep programs, test costs themselves, prospective student application fees, any tutoring a students needed, and other funding. Sometimes students needed to travel to do an interview. This was pre-pandemic, so interviews were conducted in person, or they needed to understand a program and meet faculty. We had a couple of instances where programs wanted payments from students before they received their scholarships, and they suggested that their parents would cover those costs. So we had a chance to not only help those students, but also educate those schools, the fact that many students do not have parents, not just students with a background in foster care, but many students don't have parents that are going to cover their costs for them. And then the funding during MAPS was limited, so we helped students with their application fees, and then we also provided honorariums to the mentors that helped. So how did students fund their advanced degrees? I think this is one of the actually big misconceptions and mysteries about graduate school, that there isn't funding for graduate school. And yes, students sometimes need to take out a loan, but it's very possible and probable to get your graduate school, if not fully funded, partially funded. So our students got scholarships, fellowships, and grants from the programs where they were admitted. Pipeline programs are programs that students do during their undergraduate career, which often then provide them with funding once they get to graduate school. And so we encourage students, again, that's something that we put in our 8-week course about applying to graduate school, that if you participate in this pipeline program when you're a junior or sophomore, then getting to graduate school, you will have some funding available. The MSW has, all the programs have a stipend program. It's Title IV-E, CalSWEC, through the federal child welfare. I think California gets money, but it's managed. I think the program is at UC Berkeley, but UC Berkeley, UCLA, and all the CSU have this program where students can get funding for their 2 years of MSW program, as long as they commit to 2 years working for county programs after they've completed it. And then LA has this other program that's through DCSF, Department of Child and Family Services. That's just a 1 year, but same thing. You get funding of tuition for 1 year, you work for 1 year. California needs more mental health care workers. And so last year, I think was the first year, they developed the California Health Access and Information Program, which has been giving great funding to many of our MSW students, not only paid for tuition, but also for living expenses. And it's just outright funding. There's no commitment to work, and it's not a loan, you don't pay it back. AmeriCorps programs often come with educational grants that will pay either for debt or for tuition looking forward. Many of our students took a year off, did an AmeriCorps program, and then had some funding that would pay for their next degree. If you're getting a PhD, and sometimes even at the master's levels, universities have teaching and research assistantships. There are always loans, although we caution students to only take what they can reasonably expect that they can pay back, given what their career looks like. If they're going into law and they're going to do corporate law, it's a much different proposition to take a loan than if you're doing an MSW and your salary is probably not going to ever be as high as a corporate lawyer. And then we also make them aware of loan forgiveness programs. Loan forgiveness programs are for students or employees that work in the public sector generally. And you usually get your loan payment reduced, as well as it's forgiven after a certain number of years, usually 10. So these are what we think map strengths and strategies. We understand the foster care experience and how trauma can affect academic work. So we don't shy away from a student that hasn't done well in their first 2 years, or that maybe one semester they got bad grades. We understand a lot of things happen. We help students manage the reality that they may not have the ideal scores and grades that other more affluent students with stable families have. And we collaborate with them to strategize other avenues for showcasing their strengths and readiness for graduate school. As they get farther and farther away from the trauma of their foster care experience, many of them stabilize themselves and can really do some quite remarkable things. Help students create competitive applications resulting in funding from admitting institutions. We're flexible in our mentoring process. If a student needs to talk to us once a month, we could do that. But our main focus was on that period in the fall when students were getting ready to submit their applications. And we leverage our academic knowledge and help them make connections, network, introduce them to other students and peers who've already gotten their degrees, and to administrators, encourage them to go and talk to faculty and really learn about the programs so that they know what they'll be doing for the next 2 to 6 years, depending on what kind of degree they're getting. So we have a very simple idea. Providing students with assistance equals success. Not only do applicants gain admission, but MAP students receive funding. They've been the recipients of significant scholarships, TA-ships, and other forms of assistance. GPP MAP students have received, as I said earlier, $4 million in funding. We help students present themselves as ready for the rigor of graduate school and capable of meeting the demands of challenging programs. And that is our website. Our website has a lot of ideas about how to help students navigate getting ready for a grad school, as well as sample resumes, essays, and other kind of documentation that students would need to submit. And that is the end of my presentation. And I'm going to stop sharing. And if anybody has any questions, I am happy to answer those.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Feel free, everybody, to type questions into the chat, or if you'd like to come off mute and ask the question, that would be just fine. I had a couple of questions that came in that were very similar to each other, so I'm going to stack them a bit. It was asked if you could talk a little bit more about any challenges that you faced in recruitment or just reaching your student population, and how you've overcame some of those challenges.
Well, during the period when we were doing the Guardian Professions program at UC Davis, we had funding from the Stewart Foundation, very generous funding from the Stewart Foundation, and they wanted us to have a certain number of students that we were working with each year. But I actually found that recruitment wasn't that difficult. So many students want to get advanced degrees, not so many, as you can see. I think there's a potential 300 across the state. But every year I talk to maybe 30 or 40 students. And as word of mouth, many students were recommended to us. As I said, I think our relationship with the undergraduate support program administrators helped us. We talked to them, and we talked to a lot of administrators. And, you know, many students, I could look back actually at some of the classes that we'd given and could see that students might take a class one year, and in a year or two, they were actually coming to us looking for help. So recruitment, you know, we aren't dealing with 50 students, but I never saw recruitment as being an issue. And every year that we did MAPS, we started in 2020. I think I helped maybe over 20 the last year of GPP. And then in 2020, when we started MAPS, I think we helped 11 students. And last year, I think 18 students got in. So over that 4-year period, we grew because people started hearing about what we were doing and knew that we could really be of help. And just yesterday, I got an email from a former student and said, "Oh, you know, you really helped me. I'd like to recommend you to one of my friends who's applying for an MSW." Other question? Uh-oh. Jenna, are you still there?
I am. I was just giving some space in case anyone had some
Oh,
other.
okay. Sorry.
Okay.
Things freeze, you know, you never know.
And if there are no other questions, we can end, but I want to give enough time for anybody to
Actually,
hop
John
in.
Crane is on. John was both one of our mentees. We helped him get into graduate school, if it's the same John Crane, at CSU Northridge, and then also mentored a student. John, do you want to say anything about the need for this kind of assistance, or what you see among your students? Because John also is a mentor and MSW.
Yeah, I could say that before going into the program and being a part of the program, I had a general idea about graduate school, but not as clear as I did after I experienced the program, the one-on-one mentoring, the help with the resume, scholarship application, personal statement, things like that. The recommendation letters and just really going through step by step, really peeling apart the process, it helped me become kind of fascinated in a way that I wanted to kind of share that, because it wasn't as difficult as it seemed going in after it was like thoroughly explained. Yeah, so it motivated me to become a mentor of the program. And even just in my spare time, I just feel like interacting with the program has developed that within me to want to share it and just spread the word and help students, because it's not as difficult as it seems.
I know a lot of people think, oh, graduate school, you have to have a straight A's and, be a genius or something, especially if you don't come from a family where graduate school is just either a given, or it's expected, or it's an option because you didn't, your parents weren't professionals or didn't pursue that kind of career. And so it can be a little mysterious. It is, but as I said, all my students were qualified. They just often didn't know it, and didn't know how to present that. No more questions?
Thanks for sharing that, John. That's really helpful.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
Are there any other questions that anybody has or comments? And if not, I will thank Dr. Sensiper for all of your amazing work that you're doing and for taking the time to share that with us today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and you could just add if anybody has any questions. I think you have my email, or I think they can also reach me through the MAPS website, but also you have my email, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about any questions they might have.
Thank you.
All right, great.
I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you next
Thank you.
time.
Thanks. Bye.